Okay, we got just a little more here with Chapter 9. So, Section 5 covers fermentation, which essentially is respiration that does not make use of oxygen. And so it essentially includes glycolysis, but instead of having the pyruvates broken down inside of the mitochondrion, that doesn't happen. The pyruvates are converted into other compounds, either alcohol or ethanol in the case of alcohol fermentation, or lactate in the case of lactic acid fermentation. So you see we get our gain of 2 ATPs and a couple NADHs in each case. But with alcohol fermentation, our pyruvate is converted into ethanol, also giving off some CO2. And in lactic acid fermentation, it's converted into lactate. And so you can see the NADH and NADs are just cycling here in this conversion process. And so that's it as far as extracting energy in fermentation. We don't get a whole lot, just a couple ATPs. There's still a lot of energy left in the ethanol and the lactate. So for us, of course, the preferred route is to go aerobic and pass the pyruvates into the mitochondrion, which is what we do for the most part. Some organisms can't do that. They're strictly anaerobic organisms, and they don't take advantage of aerobic respiration. So some of these are what are known as obligate anaerobes. That is, they don't use oxygen at all. In fact, oxygen for them is toxic. You'll find them only living in anaerobic conditions, like in sediments of swamps or the stomachs of cows or something like that. Others are facultative anaerobes, and that is, they're not poisoned by oxygen, they just don't necessarily use it. So they just do pyruvate, but again, oxygen is around. For example, our yeast will do that. They'll do ethanol, alcohol fermentation, even though there might be oxygen around. Okay, so you can see fermentation only gives us a net of 2 ATPs, where we can see cellular respiration with oxygen gave us anywhere from 30 to 32 ATPs. So you can see that cellular respiration is about 15 times more efficient at extracting energy from foods that are consumed. Now, if you're a yeast and you're a single-celled organism, just getting a couple out is probably okay with you. But for a large multicellular organism, like the vast majority of eukaryotes, they need to be much more efficient at extracting energy from their food, so they do aerobic respiration. Now, as you perhaps are aware, there are times when we do lactic acid fermentation in our muscles when we're exercising quite vigorously and we get an oxygen debt. So there's not enough oxygen for aerobic respiration to go, so our muscles switch to anaerobic or lactic acid fermentation. That apparently is that buildup is what can cause some muscle cramps, which is sort of a signal to you to take it easy. Okay, what else? Now, your body prefers to tap into carbohydrates when energy is needed. And so that's sort of what your body goes to first. You remember that glycogen that's stored in the liver, you'll break it down into its basic glucose molecules, and then they'll go through glycolysis, etc., etc. Now, your body can also make use of fats and proteins, and they can be broken down into various components and fed in at different steps of the process. But like I said, carbohydrates is sort of the first choice. Then you'll go to fats, and then you'll go to proteins. Now, this sort of gets us into talking about nutrition a little bit, in that this is what sort of dieting to lose weight is all about. You're trying, so you can take those, if you're consuming more calories than you burn up, these carbohydrates you consume can be converted into fats that are stored, and you always have some of that around at least, but sometimes you can get too much of it. So the notion of dieting to lose weight is to sort of restrict your caloric intake, all right, such that you are beginning to burn off more calories than you're consuming, in which case you will start tapping into those stored fats and hopefully, presumably, lose the weight. Now, it's not really a good idea to go to where you're tapping into protein significantly at all, because that's sort of a starvation diet. You're burning up all the calories you consume, you've burned up a large chunk of the fat that you have, and then your body starts tapping into proteins, and that's, like I said, a starvation diet. When you see images of people who were in these concentration camps in World War II, and they're basically skeletons with skin on them, they were for months or years on a starvation diet, and so they basically went into what you would call muscle atrophy. Their muscles were breaking down to basically provide energy for them, and it's clearly not a good thing. All right, and the last thing, feedback. So feedback is something we'll talk about, or we need to talk about, because it's a process by which living things operate. So here in cellular respiration, the goal is to make ATP. Now, if there's lots of ATP around, it serves as a negative inhibitor earlier back in the process to slow this process down. And the same with the citrate, which is one of the compounds generated in citric acid. They can both serve negative feedback to slow this process down. Now, if your body is low on ATP, you have a fair amount of what's called AMP inside of you, and it serves as positive feedback. It stimulates the process. So in terms of cellular respiration, we have both negative and positive feedback going on to either speed up the process or slow it down. And again, don't think of this as an all or none. I mean, cellular respiration won't ever really just grind to a complete halt, but again, you'll have a number of these enzyme molecules around, and when most of them are being inhibited, the process slows down. When most of them are being stimulated, the process speeds up. So it's sort of a rate-dependent process. It's moving along quickly or not so quickly, perhaps. Okay, that's it for Chapter 9.